Have you ever felt the sting of injustice burning through your soul? Have you watched as those with power used it to crush the dignity of the humble? In the bustling markets of medieval England, such tallies were not uncommon, but few were as remarkable as that of Elsbeth, a simple linen weaver whose courage would challenge the very foundations of tyranny. This is the tale of a woman who stood with nothing but truth against the weight of corruption, whose journey from humiliation to vindication reminds us that true worth lies not in gold or titles, but in the courage to stand for what is right. I ask you, dear viewer, have you ever witnessed injustice and wished for the scales to balance once more? Before we begin this journey through the cobbled streets of medieval Thornwick, I invite you to share in the comments below from which lands you hail, for our stories connect us across time and space, forming bonds stronger than castle walls. Now, let us travel back to a time when kings ruled by divine right, and the fate of the common folk hung upon the whims of those who wore velvet and gold. The morning mist clung to the cobblestones of Thornwick Market Square as Elsbeth arranged her modest wares upon a weathered wooden stool. Her fingers, calloused from years of working the loom, carefully placed each piece of rough-spun linen in neat rows. The square slowly filled with the cries of merchants, the clucking of hens in wicker cages, and the rich aroma of freshly baked bread from nearby ovens. Elsbeth had risen before the first light of dawn, as she did each day, to prepare her goods. Her aged mother lay abed in their tiny thatched cottage at the edge of town, racked with a fever that had plagued her since the first winter frosts. Each copper coin Elsbeth earned would go toward herbs and medicines, with barely enough remaining for a meager supper of barley porridge. The church bells tolled the midday hour, their solemn notes rolling across the bustling marketplace. Elsbeth had sold but 2 pieces of linen, earning only a few copper pieces that weighed lightly in the small leather pouch at her waist. Still, she smiled gently at passers-by, hoping to entice another sale before the day's end. Suddenly, the crowd parted like the sea before Moses. Whispers rippled through the marketplace. Sir Halric approaches. The king's tax collector. He cut a striking figure, did Sir Halric, with his black velvet doublet adorned with gold thread, his cloak of rich burgundy sweeping behind him as he strode through the market. 2 guards flanked him, their hands resting upon the hilts of their swords. His thin lips perpetually curled in disdain, as though the very air of the common folk offended his noble sensibilities. The tax collector's eyes, cold as winter's bite, scanned the marketplace until they landed upon Elsbeth's humble stall. His thin lips curved into something between a smile and a sneer as he approached, his boots clicking sharply against the stones. Elsbeth lowered her gaze respectfully, her heart beginning to hammer against her ribs. Sir Halric had a reputation for cruelty, particularly toward those he deemed beneath notice. His hand crashed down upon her table, sending several carefully folded linens tumbling to the dirt. Wooden bowls clattered to the ground as the crowd drew closer, hungry for spectacle. "Common wench," he bellowed, his voice cutting through the market's bustle like a newly sharpened blade. "You are coined to the crown. Pay your taxes now, or I shall seize your goods as payment." Elsbeth kept her eyes downcast, her voice barely above a whisper. "But, good sir, I have already paid my tribute a fortnight past. These few coins are all that remains to care for my ailing mother." A chorus of titters and whispers arose from the gathering crowd. Nobles out for a day's entertainment paused to watch the unfolding drama, their painted lips curving in amusement at the plight of the simple weaver. "Liar," so Halric's face contorted with theatrical rage. "Your kind always seeks to cheat the king's coffers. I shall make an example of you that all might witness the price of such deceit." Before Elsbeth could protest further, his gloved hand snatched the small leather pouch from her waist, upending it into his palm. The few copper coins, her entire day's earnings, clinked pathetically in his hand. "Is this all? You insult me with such a paltry sum." His voice carried throughout the marketplace, ensuring all could hear her shame. "Perhaps I should take your linens as well, to teach you the cost of attempting to deceive the crown." Elsbeth felt her face burn with humiliation. Laughter rippled through the crowd, some nervous, some cruel. A noble woman whispered behind her silk fan, her eyes glittering with mirth at another's misfortune. Children pointed, while their mothers pulled them closer, as though poverty might be contagious. "Please, my lord," Elsbeth whispered, fighting back tears that threatened to spill. "I have never failed to pay what is owed. Ask Goodwife, Martha, or Cooper, Thomas. They witnessed my payment to your man last month." Sir Hurrick's laugh was sharp as broken glass. "And who would believe the word of commoners against a man of my standing? Know your place, weaver woman. Your betters grow weary of your excuses." With a dramatic flourish, he pocketed her coins and turned away, his cloak swirling behind him like a blood-red banner. "Return next week with proper tribute, or I shall have your stall dismantled and your loom confiscated in the name of the king." As he departed, Elsbeth stood frozen, her dignity in tatters. The crowd slowly dispersed, some casting pitying glances her way, others still chuckling at her disgrace. She gathered her fallen linens from the muddy ground, each movement a struggle against the weight of shame that pressed upon her shoulders. That night, in their humble cottage, Elsbeth fed her mother thin broth, having nothing for herself. As she stirred the meager fire, she wondered how she would survive if Sir Hurrick continued his persecution. Without her loom and stall, she and her mother would surely perish before the next frost. Little did she know that this day of humiliation was but the first thread in a tapestry of injustice that would soon entangle her life completely. The following week brought no relief from Elsbeth's woes. True to his word, Sir Hurrick returned to her stall, this time demanding twice the usual tax. When she protested that such a sum was impossible for one of her modest means, he seized 3 of her finest linens, claiming them as payment for her insolence. "Your fingers weave, peasant, but they weave for the crown, not for yourself," he mocked. To the amusement of his entourage of nobles who had come to watch the sport, week after week, his demands grew more outrageous, first double, then triple the normal tribute. When Elsbeth could no longer produce coins, he took her goods linens, baskets of apples she had traded for, and finally, even the warm cloak she had sewn to ward off the approaching winter chill. "Consider it payment for your continued defiance," who sneered, wrapping her cloak around the shoulders of a giggling noblewoman who accompanied him. "It shall make a fine blanket for my hunting dogs." Each confrontation wounded Elsbeth's spirit. The marketplace, once her livelihood, became a place of torment. Even children who had once smiled at her now pointed with mocking fingers, parroting the cruelty of their elders. "There goes the tax cheat," they would whisper as she passed, the words cutting deeper than any blade. Nights brought little peace. Her mother's condition worsened without proper medicines, and Elsbeth often wept silently after the older woman had finally fallen into fitful slumber. How long could they endure such persecution? What sin had she committed to deserve such targeted malice? Yet not all faces turned away from her plight. On a particularly harsh day, after Sir Hurrick had taken nearly all her remaining stock, leaving her stall bare and her hopes shattered, an elderly monk named Brother Aldwin approached. His weathered hand rested gently upon her trembling shoulder. "Daughter, do not despair," he spoke softly, his voice like balm to her wounded heart. "The Almighty sees truth, even when men conceal it beneath cloaks of power. Do you recall that the king himself issued a decree exempting the poor from taxation following the Great Famine 2 summers past? Elsbeth raised her tear-stained face, disbelief mingling with a fragile hope. I have heard whispers of such a decree, but Sir Halric always denies its existence whenever it is mentioned. Brother Aldwyn's eyes twinkled, with unexpected cunning beneath his bushy white eyebrows. It exists indeed, and rests within the castle archives. Find it, and justice shall become your sword. But how could one such as I gain access to the castle archives? Elsbeth asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The guards would seize me before I crossed the first threshold. The old monk leaned closer, his breath smelling of herbs and parchments. 3 days hence, the Earl returns from his campaign in the north. There shall be a great feast, with servants coming and going throughout the castle halls. In such chaos, one more servant carrying baskets would scarcely be noticed. For the first time in weeks, Elsbeth felt a spark of hope ignite within her breast. Could she truly find proof of this decree? Would she dare to enter the lion's den in search of justice? I know many of you watching have faced moments when hope seemed but a distant memory, when those who should protect instead became your persecutors. If this tale resonates in your heart, I encourage you to share your own stories of injustice in the comments below. For in sharing our trials, we create bonds of understanding that transcend time and place, reminding us that none suffer alone. Your words may bring comfort to another soul facing similar hardships, just as Brother Aldwyn's counsel brought hope to Elsbeth in her darkest hour. Now let us return to our tale, as Elsbeth gathers her courage for a most dangerous endeavor. 3 days passed swiftly, with Elsbeth carefully observing the servants' entrances to the castle, noting the changing of the guards and the rhythms of castle life. On the evening of the great feast, she borrowed a simple serving dress from a sympathetic neighbor, tied her hair beneath a coarse linen cap, and joined the stream of villagers delivering goods to the castle kitchens. Her heart pounded like a war drum as she passed the first guards, a heavy basket of turnips balanced on her hip. They barely glanced at her, just another peasant delivering food for their betters' feast. The castle corridors bustled with activity, minstrels tuning their instruments, servants polishing silver, and guards whose attention was more focused on sampling the ale than securing the passages. Elsbeth moved cautiously through the labyrinth of stone hallways, following the directions Brother Aldwyn had whispered to her. Down winding stairs she crept, past storerooms filled with barrels of wine and salted meats, until she reached a narrow corridor lit by a single guttering torch. The archives. The heavy oak door stood slightly ajar, the keeper likely called away to assist with the festivities above. Slipping inside, Elsbeth found herself surrounded by shelves of leather-bound tomes and racks of parchment scrolls. The musty scent of ancient documents filled her nostrils as she scanned the dimly lit chamber. Where among these countless scrolls would she find the king's decree? Panic threatened to overwhelm her. She had perhaps minutes before someone discovered her presence. Breathing deeply to calm her racing heart, Elsbeth recalled Brother Aldwyn's words. The royal decrees are kept in the eastern cabinet, marked with the king's seal. Her eyes found a cabinet, its dark wood gleaming in the torchlight. Trembling fingers pulled open the heavy drawer, revealing rows of scrolls, each bearing a wax seal. Time slipped away as she frantically searched, unrolling scroll after scroll, her eyes straining in the dim light. Guards would surely come soon. Discovery would mean imprisonment, perhaps worse, just as despair began to creep into her heart. Her fingers closed around a scroll, bound with a ribbon of royal purple, sealed with red wax, bearing the unmistakable imprint of the king's signet ring. With shaking hands, she broke the seal and unrolled the parchment. The words, written in elegant script, caused her breath to catch in her throat. Let it be known, those poor souls who labor in honest trade and live by meager earnings shall be exempt from market taxation for 3 full years following the great famine. This decree shall stand as law throughout our realm, that our people might recover from hardship and prosper once more. The royal decree, the very document that could save not only herself but countless others from Sir Halric's predatory taxation. Elsbeth quickly rolled the parchment and tucked it securely into the folds of her dress. The sound of approaching footsteps spurred her into action. She slipped from the archives and merged once more with the servants. Hurrying through the corridors, her precious cargo hidden, but her heart soaring with newfound hope. That night, safe in her cottage, Elsbeth read the decree again by a candlelight, her mother watching with concerned eyes. "What will you do, child?" the older woman asked, her voice weak but her gaze sharp with worry. Elsbeth's fingers traced the royal seal, her determination hardening like steel in a smith's forge. "I shall bring justice, not only for us, but for all who suffer under Sir Halric's greed." When the market day dawned, Elsbeth arrived early, setting up her nearly empty stall with what little remained of her goods. The decree lay hidden beneath her skirts, ready for the moment of truth. She did not wait long. Sir Halric arrived with his usual pomp, flanked by guards and accompanied by a small retinue of nobles seeking entertainment. His gaze immediately found Elsbeth, his lips curling in anticipation of the day's sport. "Still here, weaver woman?" he called loudly, ensuring all nearby would hear. "I admire your persistence, though not your wisdom. What pittance have you brought for the king's coffers today?" Sir Halric strutted through the marketplace like a peacock in full display, his velvet cloak billowing behind him as the crowd parted in fearful reverence. His gaze swept across the humble stalls until it found its favored prey, Elsbeth, the weaver woman who had become his regular source of amusement and ill-gotten gains. Today, his entourage had grown larger. Minor nobles and wealthy merchants trailed in his wake, eager to witness the sport that had become the talk of Thornwick. They whispered behind jeweled fingers, eyes gleaming with anticipation for the humiliation about to unfold. "There she stands," Sir Halric announced loudly, pointing a gloved finger toward Elsbeth's nearly barren stall. "The most stubborn tax evader in all the kingdom. Shall we see what pitiful excuse she offers today?" Laughter rippled through his followers as he approached, his boots striking the cobblestones with imperious purpose. Elsbeth stood perfectly still, her hands clasped before her, no longer trembling as they once had. Something in her posture gave Sir Halric momentary pause. The downcast eyes of previous encounters had been replaced by a calm, steady gaze. "Woman," he barked, slamming his hand upon her weathered table with a necessary force, "you have been a thorn in the crown's side long enough. Today, I shall seize your stall and all within it as payment for your continued defiance." The crowd had grown dense around them. Faces both familiar and strange pressed closer to witness Elsbeth's final humiliation. Children climbed atop barrels for a better view, while market vendors paused in their work, watching with wary eyes. Sir Halric seized Elsbeth roughly by the arm, dragging her from behind her stall to stand before the assembled crowd. "Let all bear witness," he shouted, his face flushed with cruel pleasure. "This woman is a thief. She steals from the king's treasury. Today she shall be stripped of all she possesses." A murmur rippled through the gathering. Elsbeth could see familiar faces, the baker who had often traded bread for her linens, the blacksmith's wife who had shown her kindness in recent weeks, the children who once played near her stall before Sir Halric's persecution began. Would they stand idle as her final dignity was stripped away? Yet Elsbeth did not cower. Instead, She reached beneath the folds of her simple dress and withdrew the scroll, its royal seal gleaming in the morning sunlight. "Sir Halric speaks of theft," she called out, her voice clear and unwavering, carrying across the hushed marketplace. "Yet it is not I who steals from the people of Thornwick." The tax collector's face darkened with rage. "Silence, peasant! How dare you?" But Elsbeth continued, unrolling the parchment with steady hands. "Here in my hands is the king's own decree. See the royal seal that proves its truth. By the king's command, all poor laborers and honest traders are exempt from market taxation for 3 full years following the Great Famine." A collective gasp rose from the crowd. Sir Halric's face drained of all color, his mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled from water. "Lies," he finally managed to sputter, lunging toward Elsbeth to snatch the document from her hands. "Forgery, treason." But before he could reach her, a wooden staff thrust between them. Brother Aldwin stepped forward, his aged frame somehow imposing as he stood beside Elsbeth. "The woman speaks truth," the monk declared, his voice carrying the weight of his years. "I myself witnessed the king sign this decree when I served at court during the famine." Sir Halric's face contorted with fury. "The ravings of an old monk and the desperation of a peasant woman mean nothing. Guards, seize that treasonous document." The 2 guards who accompanied Sir Halric hesitated, exchanging uncertain glances. Before they could act, the clear sound of trumpets cut through the tense atmosphere. The crowd turned as one to see a royal herald entering the marketplace, his blue and gold livery marking him as a direct messenger of the king. Behind him rode several knights bearing the royal insignia. "Make way for the king's justice," the herald called, his trained voice projecting effortlessly across the square. Whispers erupted throughout the crowd. What remarkable timing! The royal herald here in Thornwick on this very day. Some would later claim divine intervention, others the careful planning of Brother Aldwin, whose connections at court were more extensive than his humble appearance suggested. The herald dismounted, his eyes taking in the scene before him. Sir Halric, face twisted with rage and fear. Elsbeth, holding a royal decree, and a tense crowd surrounding them. "What transpires here?" the herald demanded, his gaze falling upon the scroll in Elsbeth's hands. "Is that a royal document you hold, good woman?" Before Sir Halric could interject, Elsbeth stepped forward and offered the parchment with a respectful bow. "Indeed, sir. The king's decree exempting poor traders from taxation, which Sir Halric has ignored, while collecting taxes from those protected by this very law." The herald took the scroll, examining the seal carefully before unrolling it. His eyes scanned the text, his expression growing increasingly grave. When he looked up, his gaze fixed upon Sir Halric with cold precision. "This decree is genuine," he proclaimed loudly enough for all to hear. "The seal is true. The script is that of the royal scribe, and the signature is without question His Majesty's own hand." A deafening silence fell over the marketplace, broken only by the rustle of wind through banners and the distant cry of a hawk circling overhead. Then, like a dam breaking, the crowd erupted in a cacophony of voices. "Thief, deceiver, he took my last winter stores. My daughter nearly starved because of his greed." The accusations poured forth from dozens of throats as years of suppressed resentment found sudden voice. Sir Halric backed away, his face ashen, reaching instinctively for the sword at his hip, a movement not lost on the royal knights who had accompanied the herald. "Sir Halric," the herald's voice cut through the tumult, "by the authority vested in me by His Majesty King Edward, I place you under arrest for fraud against the crown, abuse of office, and unlawful taxation of His Majesty's subjects." 2 knights moved forward, their hands resting meaningfully on their sword hilts. So Halric looked wildly around, seeking escape or ally, and finding neither. The same nobles who had laughed at his cruel jests now edged away, unwilling to be associated with a man who had fallen from royal favor. "This is a mistake," Sir Halric protested, his voice climbing to an undignified pitch. "I am the king's appointed collector. I have served loyally for 15 years. "You have served yourself, not the crown," the herald replied coldly. "The king's law is clear, and you have broken it repeatedly and willfully. Your accounting books will be examined, and full restitution will be made to those you have wronged." At a signal from the herald, the knights stepped forward and seized Sir Halric by the arms. His fine velvet cloak was removed, and his hands bound with coarse rope, a deliberate humiliation for a man of his standing. As he was led away toward the castle dungeons, the crowd's mood shifted from shock to jubilation. Cheers erupted as the man who had terrorized them for so long was brought low before their eyes. Elsbeth stood in stunned silence, scarcely able to believe what had transpired. Around her, the marketplace had transformed into a scene of celebration. People who had previously avoided her gaze now approached with smiles and words of admiration. Children danced in circles, singing improvised songs about the downfall of the wicked tax collector. The royal herald turned to Elsbeth, offering a formal bow that caused fresh murmurs of astonishment from the onlookers. "Your courage has uncovered a great injustice, good woman. The king shall hear of this day's events." As the herald and his remaining knights departed to begin the investigation into Sir Halric's misdeeds, the people of Thornwick gathered around Elsbeth. Goodwife Martha pressed a warm loaf of bread into her hands. The cooper offered a small barrel of ale for celebration. Children placed wildflowers at her feet as though she were a saint's statue. Brother Aldwyn smiled gently at her side. "Truth is the most powerful weapon against tyranny," he said softly. "You have wielded it well, daughter." Elsbeth returned to her humble cottage that evening, her basket filled with gifts from grateful villagers, food, cloth, medicines for her mother. As she tended to the older woman, recounting the day's events, a strange peace settled over her. The shame that had been her constant companion these past months had lifted, replaced by something she had nearly forgotten: dignity. Yet her story was far from complete. The events in the marketplace had set in motion wheels that would continue to turn, bringing changes greater than Elsbeth could have imagined. 3 days later, as Elsbeth arranged her meager remaining stock at her market stall, a commotion at the square's edge drew all eyes. Royal guards entered the marketplace, their polished armor gleaming in the autumn sunlight. Behind them came a covered litter borne by 4 servants in the king's livery. The marketplace fell silent as the litter was set down and its curtains drawn back to reveal Lord Pembroke, the king's trusted advisor, known throughout the realm for his fair judgments. The crowd bowed deeply as he rose and surveyed the marketplace. "I seek the woman called Elsbeth the Weaver," he announced, his voice carrying authority without cruelty, stark contrast to Sir Halric's bluster. With trembling knees but steady heart, Elsbeth stepped forward. "I am she, my lord." Lord Pembroke studied her for a moment, then nodded as though confirming something to himself. "Elsbeth the Weaver, His Majesty King Edward requests your presence at the royal court. A most unusual honor for one of common birth. But these are unusual circumstances indeed." Gasps and whispers rippled through the crowd. The king himself wished to see Elsbeth. Such a summons was unprecedented in Thornwick's history. "The king wishes to see me." Elsbeth could scarcely form the words, certain she had misheard. "Indeed, the matter of Sir Halric's abuses has reached His Majesty's ears, along with your role in bringing these crimes to light. The litter awaits to convey you to the castle with the dignity befitting one who has served the crown through her courage." What could Elsbeth do but accept? After hastily returning to her cottage to don her one good dress, faded but clean, and ensure her mother would be cared for by a neighbor, she found herself within the cushioned interior of the royal litter, being carried toward the castle she had previously entered only through stealth and desperation. The great hall of Thornwick Castle was filled with light from high windows and the warmth of dozens of torches set in iron brackets along stone walls. Nobles and courtiers lined the path to the dais where King Edward sat upon his ornate oak throne. Their curious gazes followed Elsbeth as she walked the seemingly endless distance across the polished floor, her rough-spun dress stark against their silks and velvets. Though her heart pounded like a blacksmith's hammer, Elsbeth kept her eyes forward and her steps measured. Remembering her mother's oft-repeated wisdom, true nobility shows in bearing, not birth. At the foot of the dais, she knelt as she had been instructed, head bowed before her sovereign. King Edward was not the remote figure of peasant imagination, but a man of middle years with keen eyes that missed little. He leaned forward slightly, studying the woman who had caused such an upset in his kingdom's governance. "Rise, Elsbeth of Thornwick," he commanded, his voice neither harsh nor particularly gentle. "We would look upon the face of one who values our decree more than those sworn to uphold it." Elsbeth rose, meeting the king's gaze briefly, before lowering her eyes respectfully. The hall had grown so silent, she could hear the soft crackle of torches. "Your Majesty," she said, her voice small but clear in the hushed space. "Tell us," the king continued, "how came you to possess knowledge of our decree when our appointed collector denied its existence?" So Elsbeth recounted her tale, the months of increasing harassment, Brother Aldwyn's counsel, her desperate search through the castle archives. She spoke simply but truthfully, omitting nothing of Sir Ulrich's cruelty or her own fear. When she finished, the king was silent for a long moment. Then, surprisingly, he smiled, a brief expression that transformed his stern countenance. "Courage takes many forms," he observed. "Some wield swords in battle, others speak truth in the face of power. Both serve the realm equally." He gestured to Lord Pembroke, who stepped forward with a rolled parchment bearing a fresh royal seal. "Elsbeth of Thornwick," the king proclaimed, "you have shown loyalty to the crown by upholding our decree when others betrayed it. For this service, we grant you freedom from all taxation in perpetuity, and the right to trade freely throughout our realm without hindrance or fee." Murmurs of astonishment swept through the hall. Such a privilege was rarely granted even to lesser nobility, let alone a common weaver woman. "Furthermore," the king continued, "we appoint you to the newly created position of People's Advocate for the region of Thornwick. You shall bring concerns of the common folk directly to our appointed governor, ensuring that no future Sir Ulrich may abuse our subjects without recourse." Lord Pembroke stepped forward, placing the sealed decree in Elsbeth's trembling hands. "This is your authority, granted by the king's own hand," he explained quietly. "None may challenge it without challenging the crown itself." Elsbeth could scarcely comprehend the transformation of her circumstances. From despised and humiliated weaver to royal appointee in the span of mere days, she sank into a deep curtsy, pressing the parchment to her heart. "Your Majesty honors me beyond all deserving," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "I shall serve with all loyalty and truth." The king nodded, satisfied. "See that you do. Justice thrives not only in grand halls and courts, but in marketplace stalls and village squares. Remember this as you execute your duties." As Elsbeth was escorted from the hall, whispers followed her, no longer mocking, but filled with wonder and not a little calculation. By morning, every soul in Thornwick would know of her elevation, and many who had turned their backs would seek to claim they had always supported her. The morning Elsbeth returned to the marketplace was unlike any in Thornwick's memory. Word of her audience with the king and her unprecedented appointment had spread through the town like wildfire, transforming overnight the woman who had been an object of scorn into a figure of respect and influence. As she approached her humble stall, now repaired and restocked through the generosity of neighbors, the crowd parted reverently. Market vendors bowed their heads as she passed. Mothers held up their children, whispering, "See the woman who spoke truth to power and prevailed." Where once there had been mockery, now there were gifts, a bunch of autumn flowers, a basket of apples, offers of assistance to care for her ailing mother. The very nobles who had laughed at her humiliation now approached with courteous greetings and invitations to their homes. Elsbeth accepted these changes with the same quiet dignity that had sustained her through months of persecution. She neither gloated over her vindication, nor sought revenge against those who had abandoned her in her time of need. This restraint, perhaps more than any royal decree, earned her the genuine respect of Thornwick's people. In the weeks that followed, Elsbeth's small cottage became an unexpected center of activity. Common folk came with their grievances and concerns, knowing she would carry worthy issues to the governor's attention. She listened patiently to each petitioner, from farmers disputing land boundaries to widows struggling under unfair inheritance laws. True to her nature, Elsbeth used her newfound influence not for personal gain, but to ease the burdens of those still suffering under unjust practices. Her simple home remained unchanged, save for the addition of a proper desk and writing materials, gifts from the governor, who found in Elsbeth an invaluable liaison to the common people. Sir Halrick's fate provided a lasting lesson to officials throughout the region. After a thorough examination of his accounts, revealed the extent of his theft, sums far exceeding what he had forwarded to the royal treasury. He was stripped of title and lands. In a final justice that many considered divinely inspired, he was sentenced to serve as a common laborer, rebuilding roads and bridges throughout the very region he had once terrorized. Those who passed him, sweating in the sun with chains at his ankles, no longer cowered in fear, but looked upon him with pity, mingled with satisfaction. His name became a cautionary tale, whispered among officials tempted to abuse their power. Remember Sir Halrick, who fell from silk to sackcloth through his own greed. On the anniversary of Sir Halrick's arrest, the people of Thornwick held a festival to celebrate what they now call Truth Day. At its center stood Elsbeth, no longer the humiliated weaver, but a symbol of justice achieved through courage and perseverance. As twilight fell and lanterns illuminated the marketplace, she stood before her neighbors and spoke words that would be remembered long after. The measure of our worth lies not in gold or titles or fine garments, but in the truth we carry in our hearts. When injustice prevails, it is not enough to endure in silence. We must find the courage to speak, even when our voices tremble, for in that trembling voice may lie the salvation of many. Children reenacted her confrontation with Sir Halrick in a play that brought both laughter and tears. Minstrels composed ballads of the weaver and the tax collector that would spread throughout the kingdom, inspiring others to stand against corruption. As for Elsbeth herself, she never forgot her origins or the lesson of her journey. Each day, before attending to her new duties, she still sat at her loom for an hour, her fingers weaving threads into cloths, a reminder that from the simplest of materials could come both beauty and strength. The tale of Elsbeth, the humble weaver who brought down a corrupt official and earned the king's favor, traveled far beyond Thornwick's boundaries. It was told in taverns and great halls alike, sometimes embellished but always preserving its essential truth, that courage and honesty could triumph over power and cruelty. In distant villages, other victims of injustice heard her story and found the courage to speak out. In royal courts, advisors reminded their lords that even the lowest subject might one day stand before the king with truth as their only shield. And in Thornwick itself, a simple stone was eventually placed in the marketplace, bearing words attributed to Elsbeth herself. Just as like a well-woven cloth is strongest when its threads connect us all, from the highest to the lowest, bound together in truth. My friends, if this tale of courage and vindication has touched your heart, I ask you to join our fellowship of storytellers. Like Elsma, who transformed her community through the power of truth revealed, your support allows us to continue bringing tales of justice and moral triumph to all who yearn for them. Press the inscription symbol below to join our circle, where each fortnight we share new chronicles of those who, like Elsbeth, faced darkness with nothing but truth as their shield. Activate the bell of summoning, that you might be among the first to hear each new tale as it unfolds. Remember that in times of difficulty, stories like Elsbeth's remind us that justice, though sometimes slow in its arrival, comes to those who stand firm in their truth. Until our paths cross again in the realm of tallies, may courage be your companion and dignity your strength.